Okay, this is a quick run through of skill rolling in War Stories. It's for my players, so listen up, guys. It's pretty simple. So, a dice pool, which is the core mechanic of dice rolling in War Stories, is comprised of a stat and a skill. That gives you a number of d6s, which you then roll to achieve successes. A single 6 gives you a success. So you only need to get 1 6 to be successful in your dice pool if it's unopposed. If you roll more than 1 6, you can harvest those additional successes as what are known as lucky strikes. You can have a maximum of 2 lucky strikes, and you can do a whole stack of things with lucky strikes, which I'll talk through in a second. If you roll any 1s, they do nothing. However, if you push, and we'll talk about pushing now, if you push, what you're doing is you're saying, I am not satisfied with what I've rolled. So you either failed the roll, you didn't get any successes, or you decide you want to push your luck and try and get some lucky strikes. You roll all of the dice that did not come up with a 6 or a 1. So if I rolled 4 dice, and I'll do that right now on the little dice roller that you can see. Let me just roll that. So you can see that I've rolled a 1, so that cannot be re-rolled. I can, however, re-roll the other 3 dice when I decide I'm going to push. So I'll do that now. And I got no successes, but I did get a dud, which means I now give a foo bar to the GM. And we'll talk about how that works in a moment. So the GM now has 1 foo bar, and I have not succeeded despite my push. If I'd rolled a 6 and a 1, the GM would have gotten that foo bar, and I would have gotten a success. If I'd rolled 2 6s, I could have succeeded. I could have taken the additional 6 as a lucky strike, and I could have given the GM a foo bar as well. So as you can imagine, it gets quite complicated. Now, if I have a lucky strike, which I can have a maximum of 2, I can use them to do a whole bunch of things as a player. And I should point out, this is very much focused on the player. GMs have a few additional use cases for their foo bars. So the first thing I can do is I can use a lucky strike to push and re-roll my 1s. So that's useful. Mind you, if I roll any additional 1s, I get to keep them. The second thing I can do is add 2 additional dice to my dice pool, and we'll talk about increasing our dice pool in a moment. I can change a minor plot point, so I can add an additional NPC, I can have a sudden squall or a storm come through, I can have a light go out. I can gain a fast action, so I only get 2 actions per round, 1 slow, 1 fast. I can have an additional fast action as a result of spending my lucky strike, which allows me to dive out of the way of a close combat or dive out of the way of a shot fired at range combat. I can remove what's called suppression, which we'll talk about when we get to combat. I can roll 1 die even though I have no die in my dice pool at all. It does require GM. And I can re-roll a critical result either against myself or against an opponent, which once again is a combat situation. The GM, when they have duds, they can get foo bars, and they can spend those foo bars immediately to create a mishap with my piece of equipment, so they can basically make my gun jam or break or something like that. Or they can harvest them. They can either give up to 2 foo bar per player, so each player can have 2 foo bar and 2 lucky strikes, or they can add those foo bars to a general pool, which allows them to do various other things. So it's as simple as roll your pool of dice, keep your 6s, pay attention to your 1s. You can push at no cost, but if you use a lucky strike, your pushing is likely to be more successful. There are a couple of things I can do to increase or reduce my dice pool, which we'll talk about now. So the first of those is I can get assistance from an NPC or a PC. If the person assisting me, normally that only gives me a dice, and they burn the same action that I burn. So if I'm using a slow action, then they will have to use a slow action as well. If I use a fast action. If I'm doing something in a fast action, then they will use a fast action as well to support me. So they give me a dice, and I can have a number of people assist me up to what seems reasonable. If it's my buddy who's assisting me, they give me +2 dice, not +1 dice. So buddies are better at helping me than normal players. I can have an opposed roll. So we haven't talked about this, but if I roll a dice pool, say I'm rolling stealth, you're rolling perception, it's called opposed. You're trying to see me, I'm trying to hide from you. If I initiate that conflict, i.e. I'm sneaking up on you, then I must exceed your perception check with my successes to sneak up on you. If it's a draw, I lose. If I get less than you, I lose. You, however, are most likely not able to push because you are doing what's called a passive skill roll, i.e. you don't necessarily know I'm sneaking up on you. So therefore, you would not be able to push in that scenario, whereas I could push. Group rolls. Okay, this is where a player is representing the group for a particular purpose, and we'll go back to that stealth versus perception one because it's kind of the standard. So I roll stealth on behalf of the whole party because I have the worst stealth in the party and therefore am most likely to be discovered. My opponent, who's rolling perception, is assumedly the person with the best perception in the opposing party, because it's the person with the best perception who sees, and then they tell all their buddies, I've seen something over there. So it's that kind of logic, right? So group roles, I represent the whole team. I can get assistance from others, by the way. There are other advantages that can be applied. So I might have gear bonuses. So I might be wearing camouflage gear, which gives me +1 dice to my stealth pool. It could be raining and dark and windy and all of those things, which gives me +2 dice because the weather conditions are perfect for sneaking up on someone and actually make it much harder for the other person to see. Equally, they might be getting a bonus because they have tripwires set up and I'm going to, ring the bell, as it were, when I'm trying to sneak up on them. Finally, and most importantly in war stories, I also have what are called talents and specializations, which add bonuses to dice based on circumstance or on the innate characteristic of the talent. I'll give you the example of book smart, which is a bit of a different one. So when I'm rolling insight and I'm trying to understand or recall information, I can add 1 die if I have book smart 1, and I can add 2 die if I have book smart 2. So I can get additional die in to add to my dice pool. So let's just kind of go through how that dice pool will be constructed. So my intelligence is 2, I have no insight, but I do have book smart 1. It's a bit of a silly example, but work with me. Then I would start with 3 die. Fred, who's a genius researcher, is able to help me, and he also happens to be my buddy, so he adds an additional 2 die, so now I'm up to 5 die. There are no opponents trying to stop me from gaining insight, and I am rolling on behalf of the group because the GM doesn't want everyone kind of tooling through. This represents everyone. However, I have index cards to the library. I'm really working hard on this example, which means I get +2 die for the index cards that I've discovered. So now I'm rolling 7 die instead of the initial 2 die that I would have rolled otherwise. So that's how dice pools work, and then I would roll those 7 die, and for every 6 that I got, I would get a success, noting I only need 1 6 to succeed. I would then be able to use the additional 6s to grant myself some lucky strikes as long as I wasn't at my maximum. Interestingly, you can give lucky strikes to other players, so you can pass on your successes. You just have to have a good reason for doing so. And in this case, it could be I'm sharing that knowledge with the rest of the group, so I'm going to grant that advantage to one of the other players because I'm already sitting on 2 lucky strikes and they've only got 1, and I'd like to give them my additional 1. That's it. That's skill rolling at its most basic. Hopefully that helps.